Hey everyone, so it's Hearth and welcome back to my channel. So on today's video I'm going to be talking about my personal pendulum collection and a little bit of how I found them all and kind of the mistakes I made when I was finding my personal pendulums. So I just finished filming my video on pendulums, on what they are, on how to choose them, on how to use them, on why they work, on how they work, and on pendulum boards. That was quite a long video, and I was contemplating including my pendulum collection tour in that video. But after filming for maybe an hour and a half and having a lot more footage than what I ended up with when I finished editing, I decided that it's probably better to do it in its own separate video because I know that not everyone is going to be interested in my personal pendulums, but I did kind of want to talk you through my pendulums and how I ended up finding them. So if you didn't watch that video and you are interested, I will put it in the card that's up here or up here. I don't really know where it is. And I'll also put it in the description box down below for anyone that's interested in seeing the video that I did on pendulums and how to choose them and use them. But today I just wanted to talk you through my personal pendulums and a little bit of the story and the different ways that I use my personal ones. So at the minute I have 5 pendulums. I definitely have considerably more than 5 pendulums. Some of them I either don't use anymore because I don't connect to them. Some of them I don't use anymore because they decided to wander off. Some of them I think I probably just lost somewhere between college and uni and my parents' house and my house. I think it's somewhere along the way they just went missing. But at the moment I have 5 pendulums that have survived long enough being with me that I haven't lost them, broken them, damaged them, or they just got bored of me and wandered off. So these 5 are the ones that I have the most connection to, I find, and the ones that I work with most frequently. So there are definitely some pendulums out of these 5 that I work with a lot less. And there's probably a really good reason for that, and that's because I didn't personally choose them. They either were given to me, or they kind of wanted to stick around and didn't want to go with anyone else but don't particularly like working with me either. And there are some pendulums that I will be talking about later that really hated me, and I honestly find that quite a comical story, so I will save that for a bit later in the video. But the first pendulum that I have is this one. It is a beautiful Lepidolite that it doesn't seem to want to focus on. But it is a really beautiful pendulum. It has a really tiny short chain. And now I love Lepidolite as a stone, and I don't know about anyone else, I go through phases with stones. So like, I've been in a citrine phase, I've been in a moonstone phase, I was in an opalite phase for like a year and I have like 50 pieces of opalite. I've been in a fluorite phase, and then I went through a Lepidolite phase, and this is when this pendulum came into my life. This is a really recent addition to the collection. This is only maybe like 6 months old or something, and I really don't use this pendulum at all. I don't think I've ever used this pendulum, but I actually got this in a stock order. So I have like a store online and I do markets and stuff where I sell pendulums and other kind of holistic items like candles and stuff. But the pendulums I have to get in because I don't make them myself. And this little guy was in an order, and I got it in and I opened the box, and immediately it was just like, no, I don't want to go, I want to stay here. So yeah, I ended up keeping this little guy because it really didn't like anyone else. Like, it didn't want to be there. So I ended up keeping it. But I personally never use him, and it's not because I don't like him, it's not because I don't connect with him, it's just because I have pendulums that just shout a lot louder. So I think this little guy definitely needs a bit more use, and I'm gonna definitely be trying to use this guy more in the future because he is a really sweet pendulum. Actually, this is a question for you guys. Do you give your tools, whether that be pendulums or crystals or anything, do you give them pronouns? Like, do you give them like he, she, it, them, they? Like, I want to know what you call your pendulums, because I have some pendulums where they are just an item, they are just a tool, they are just an it. But then I have some pendulums like this little guy, that this one wants me to call it male pronouns. And I don't know whether that's just me being weird, and I like to give, I basically like to humanize my tools. That's how like sad I am. I like to humanize my tools. But does anyone else do that? Do you like give your tools and crystals names? I've never gone as far as names, but I do give them pronouns, which to a lot of people is kind of weird. So I'm curious as to whether any of you guys do that. But I need to use this little guy way more than I do, because at the minute I don't think I've ever used him, and I feel so guilty about that because he's so adorable. You're so cute. So I need to use you more. But he is like one of my most recent additions, and I just do not use him, and I feel so bad. Now the next pendulum that I have is actually this little guy. Now this little guy has a really nice story. This is also one of my newest pendulums. I got this little guy on August the 11th. And I know that because I was a stall holder at the Llangollen Fairy Festival, and we were packing up at the end of the day, and I was like, I have to look around the stalls before everything's gone. So I went round and I walked past a stall, and she'd sold out of almost everything. Like almost everything on her stall was gone and packed away. If there was anything left, honestly. Her stall was like pretty empty at this point. And she had 3 pendulums left. And I walked past and I was with my mum, and immediately I was like, we gotta stop. She was like, are you okay? Like, seriously, are you okay? Like, you seem a bit weird. I'm like, no, I'm fine. I just need to go to this stall. So I went over to the stall, and there on the table was this beautiful ruby and zoetite pendulum. Like, isn't it beautiful? I love this pendulum, and this is one of those pendulums where I never had to pick it up. I know that in my pendulum video, I did say that if you're going to get pendulums, I would suggest picking them up, trying them, going through this process of finding the right pendulum. But with this one, she just like screamed at me. She was like, stop! And I just stopped dead in my tracks, like midway through, like walking past. There was like loads of people behind me, and I just stopped dead. But I had to go to the stall, and this little beauty was £5 from this wonderful lady. I think it might have even been £4 from this wonderful lady. And this is the pendulum that was featured in my Witchcraft travels video, where I showed you kind of the tools that I take with me when I go on holiday and go on like trips when I go for markets and stuff. So this pendulum goes with me literally everywhere. So I had to fish this one out of the bottom of my bag. Like, she lives in this organza bag, and I had to like dig the bag out the bottom of my bag because this one goes with me absolutely everywhere. And that's one of the things about pendulums, is that I have many pendulums. Like, I've had a lot more pendulums, but I have a lot more than maybe any person necessarily needs. But I use them for different things. So this little beauty is my travel pendulum. She is the one that I take to events. She is the one that I carry to the supermarket with me and the shopping centre. She's the one that goes on holiday with me. This is kind of my travel pendulum. She's small, but she is really swingy, like really good, strong swings. And so I really like this one as a travel pendulum, and she is my only pendulum that I have bought in person, but never actually had to test. I never had to take time to connect with her. I never had to do anything. I just bought her because immediately I knew that she needed to be my pendulum. So she's a fantastic pendulum. I hope that other people have experiences with this with pendulums, because it's really, really great when you find one that you just connect with immediately. It's amazing. So the next pendulum that I have is actually one that I don't particularly use very much, and I feel really bad about not using this pendulum very much, but this one was a gift. And although I love the pendulum and I love the fact that someone was thoughtful enough to buy it for me as a gift, I don't know what it is. I have just never really been able to fully connect to it. Not really sure why. Maybe it's the crystal. I'm not particularly an amethyst person, unless it's like really, really dark amethyst. I've never really been an amethyst person. But for whatever reason, I don't really connect to this pendulum very much. And I would give the pendulum to someone who really connected to it. if it wasn't that I got it as a gift. And I really, really appreciate the fact that someone was thoughtful enough to get me a pendulum as a gift, because look at him, he's beautiful. And I absolutely love looking at him, but I have just never had enormous draws to use him in a reading, ever. So I don't really use this pendulum, and it's very sad because I know a lot of people say that you should, other people should buy your divination tools. You shouldn't buy a tarot deck, you shouldn't buy a pendulum. But I honestly find that the pendulums where I have either not bought it myself and it's been a gift, or the pendulums that I get online, I have just never, ever, ever, ever had the same connection to, ever. So I keep this little beauty, even though I don't personally work with him in readings. So I am actually kind of tempted, now I think of it, to actually unloop him from his chain and actually use him as a pendant, because I love the actual pendulum aspect. I love this little base, but I don't work with him. So that's another thing that you can do, is if like you don't necessarily work with a pendulum but you love the pendulum, you can do what I might do with this and actually turn it into a piece of jewelry, because I think this would look really beautiful on jewelry, and I would take it so many more places and I would get so much more use out of it, and I would connect with it so much more as a piece of jewelry than I do as a pendulum. And you know what? That happens. Sometimes you can get a pendulum and it just doesn't work for you, and sometimes you just don't connect with it, and that is completely fine. Like, not every pendulum you're going to connect with, and it's, you know, no harm in that. That's completely fine. And you also find it where there are some pendulums, I've had it before, there are some pendulums where you connected with it really, really well, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you just can't use it anymore. And it's not the fault of the person or the pendulum, it's just something that kind of happens. It's kind of like relationships. Sometimes it just doesn't work anymore, and that's okay. Like, we just have to move on and find something different. And it's not that anything's wrong with the pendulum, it just kind of happens. And I think that's kind of what happened with this, is that I connected to it because it was a gift, but I never really connected with it enough to use it as a pendulum. Now the next one is this one. Now this is the one that I spent like 3/4 of my time holding in the pendulum video, because this is my most used pendulum ever. I got this at an event from a shaman, and she was lovely, the lady was so nice. And I walked around the event because I had a stall there, and I saw this little metal pendulum. Now I don't actually know what it's made of, other than it's metal. I have a feeling it's just an alloy that has just like a gold finish on it, because I did not pay very much for it. I think this was about £5. And I walked past and I stopped dead in my tracks again, and there was just this kind of like tray of pendulums. Now typically I don't like it when people have loads of pendulums like jumbled together, because I think it's kind of mean to the pendulums, but this little guy was amongst a bunch of metal and crystal pendulums, and I picked a few out, and I was torn between this little guy and his silver counterpart. And I have never had a pendulum that swung as large as this one did. As soon as I asked it anything, huge swings, and immediately I was like, I don't care if I've made a loss today, I have to buy this pendulum. So I did. I got the pendulum there and then, and this is my most used pendulum of all of them. This one I actually use for very different things to my kind of travel pendulum or to any of the others that I use. This one I use in spell work. This is my little spell work companion. So when in my pendulum video I was talking about my pendulum being kind of like almost like a familiar but not a familiar, because it's not a spirit, it's a pendulum. I find that I work with this pendulum as I would work with a familiar spirit if I chose to ever have one, in that it is a working companion. It is a tool that gives me spiritual guidance whilst I'm doing workings. So I will use it to help me judge how many of an ingredient I need to add into an incense, or how much oil I need to add into a loaded candle, or which crystals to use on an altar, or the directional placement for things. This pendulum helps me with so many more things than any other pendulum, and this pendulum is the one that taught me to use pendulums in a completely different way. So in the last two pendulums that I'm going to talk about, I used them solely for yes/no questions. That was it. Like divination, is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? Is it going to happen on Tuesday? You know, that kind of thing. This was the pendulum that taught me to use pendulums completely differently, because they don't have to be just a yes/no answer just for divination. You can include them into so many other things. So I use this one when I am loading 7-day novena candles for customers, when I'm loading them for myself. I use them when I'm working with crystals for altars. If I can't intuitively decide which crystal to pick out for a customer or which crystal to pick out for myself, I will allow this particular pendulum to do that for me. And honestly, I find this little guy to be so helpful. It's my only ever metal pendulum, but honestly, I adore working with this pendulum, and that's why I think some of the others have kind of taken a back seat. It's not because I don't enjoy working with them, it's simply because I work with this one more, and this is the one that I reach for above all of the others. So while the others live in little bags and little cubby holes in safe locations, this sturdy little guy lives in my oil and glitter box that I use for loaded candles. It has like a place in that box because I use it so frequently. Every single time I do novena candles, every single time I do candle magic, this little guy is on this table ready to help in that box. So I love this pendulum. Now the last two are actually my two first ever pendulums. So the first pendulum of my first pendulums is this one. The first pendulum is this beautiful small clear quartz cone pendulum. Now this one is one of my first pendulums because the gap between my first ever pendulum, which is what I'm going to be talking about next, which is the kind of comical story, and this pendulum is about 8 years, something crazy like that. This was my first ever pendulum that I got when I really got back into divination again. So I tried divination when I was initially starting out as a practitioner, which was like 13 years ago. And I had a Royal Tarot deck, and I had a pendulum, and I had a set of runes. And I still have 2 of those things, but the pendulum didn't sit well with me, and it didn't like me either. So I ended up never using a pendulum. And then I joined the Earth Religion Society at university, and they had an event where we were doing pendulum night. And that was kind of the first time I'd used a pendulum in like 8 years. It was amazing. And this was the pendulum that I was given at the start of the class. And I don't know what it was, I just got the most amazing answers from it. It was fantastic. Generally, I go for kind of the weightier, heavier pendulums, like my metal one, because they give stronger swings, and that gives me like a more decent result. Like, you know that that's the right answer. I had avoided these kind of small cone pendulums because they tend to be kind of flitty. They like going everywhere, and it's quite hard to control them sometimes. But as soon as I started using this one, it gave me the most fantastic answers that at the end of the night, I completely begged the leader of the group if I could purchase the pendulum. And it turns out that the pendulums were actually being rented from the store down in town, and they were going to give them back that night. So I paid the owner of the society to buy the pendulum, and then he was giving all of the money that he raised that night back to the store owner so that she was paid for the pendulums. So I ended up getting this little guy, and I will never ever get rid of this pendulum because it is, to me, my first official pendulum, the first pendulum that I ever got, that I ever loved, that I ever connected with. So this pendulum will like forever be my pendulum. Like, I love all of the others, and I use the others way more than I use this one. But because this is my first pendulum, this is the one that I have the connection with the most. So this was my first ever official pendulum. Do you guys remember what your first ever pendulum was? Because I think it holds a special place in your heart. You know, like the first ever Book of Shadows, the first ever tarot deck. Like, it's really kind of significant when you're starting your practice. So this was my first ever official pendulum. I would like to know what everyone else's was, because I'd like to know whether it's changed, whether you go for something different, because I started with this little tiny pendulum, and now I end up buying like the biggest, chunkiest, heaviest pendulums on the market. So I'd be curious to know what everyone else started with. And my last pendulum is the only one of the ones that has gone missing that has a really comical story behind it. And it's one of the reasons why I now refuse to buy pendulums off the internet, because I just don't find that it's a good idea. So when I was, it has to be something like 11, 12, something like that. I'd been practicing for a couple of years. I had a Royal Tarot deck. I had some notebooks full of writings and scribbles, and I was desperate to get a pendulum. So I scoured the internet and I eventually found one that was stunning, like beautiful, and I begged my parents, like I begged them, I was like, please, I will be so good till I'm like 18, which didn't work out. But you know, it never does when you're like 10 or something. And I was like, please, please, I want this pendulum so bad. Can I get this pendulum? And it's when like eBay was kind of like just kicking off, and it wasn't full of just loads of sellers selling just really cheap knockoff stuff. It had some really decent stuff on it. And it was a beautiful silver coated alloy pendulum, but it was hollow, and it had like a pentacle on the side and some flowers and stuff going up it, and it had a cap that you would pop the latch, open the top, and you could take the cone out, and the cone was opalite. And if you wanted to, you could buy like replacement cone crystals to put in the pendulum, seal it back up again, and then use the pendulum. And it was beautiful, and it was reasonably cheap actually, as far as I can remember. Like, it wasn't very expensive. So my parents agreed, and I was so excited. Like, this was the day I was gonna get my first ever pendulum. It was like the best feeling ever. And it arrived, and it was just as pretty as it was online. Like, it was so beautiful. And then I tried using it, and it refused to give me any answers. Like, literally, flat out refused. Like, it would just jiggle and be like, no, I'm not giving you an answer. No, go away, leave me alone. And it's not like I just tried like once. I tried like every single week for a good like 3 years. I tried to get this pendulum to do something. I tried to get this pendulum to like me. And every time I got like a vague answer out of it, it would be like the complete opposite of the actual answer. So I used to, instead of using my modern method, which is show me a yes, show me a no, I used to ask it to give me yes, no answers to things that I either knew were true or knew were false. So I used to use like a pendulum board type thing, like just a piece of paper, and I'd be like, is my full name this? And it would just be like, no. And I'm like, it is, but fine, you don't want to give me an answer. And then I'd be like, was I born on this day? And it'd be like, no. And then I'd give it like a really fake question, and it would be like, yes, that's true. And I'm like, now this pendulum is just being annoying. It's just being mean. This pendulum does not like me. So a few more years went by, and I was trying with this stinking pendulum, and it just did not like me. And then I met a few other people that were practitioners, and I let one of those try the pendulum, and it gave them perfect stinking answers. Like, they were using the exact same technique, the exact same method, the exact same pendulum in the exact same environment, in the exact same position, and it gave them perfect answers, like to the T, perfect answers. And I was so annoyed, because I was like, that's my pendulum, my first ever pendulum, and it doesn't even like me enough to give me correct answers. I was not happy. So in the end, I decided, I was reserved that my pendulum was not going to give me decent enough answers. And then it had been like nearly 10 years at this point. I ended up going to university. I took the pendulum with me. Somewhere along the way, it didn't reappear at the other end, and I got to university and my pendulum was just gone. And I have never seen that pendulum ever again. It just vanished. And I know that some people are going to be like, oh, it was just lost in transit. And I mean, yeah, there is a really good chance it was lost in transit, because anyone who's like packed up all of their stuff and moved to university, you know, you lose a lot of stuff. Like, there's some stuff you just never see again. But it just seemed so kind of ironic that the pendulum that hated me the most and that I was getting so annoyed with just vamoosed, disappeared into thin air, and then like 3 weeks later I found this one. So that is my reasoning why I don't buy pendulums online. And that is what I mentioned in my last pendulum video, because I have just had never a good experience when I've bought a pendulum online. The pendulum has either not liked me, hated me, or I've just never connected to it. So that is my kind of pendulum collection and my stories and history behind my personal pendulums, and just a little bit of an additional story for a pendulum that I no longer know where it is. It's probably somewhere in the Welsh countryside by now, because it disappeared. And I will never see it again, most probably. But I will let you know if I do find it again, because I would be really, really curious to know whether 10 years later that pendulum will work for me, whether I can convince it enough to get it to work for me, because I would really love to know. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was a little bit all over the place. It is really, really late. It is like 8 minutes to 2 in the morning, and it's late, and my brain goes to mush when it gets past 10 p.m. But I am glad that I did it, because I wanted to show you guys kind of my history with pendulums, and why not everyone is going to have perfect experiences with pendulums, and why not everyone has the perfect pendulum first time. Like, sometimes it just doesn't happen, and you just have to kind of accept that. It's like friendships. Friendships come and go. Sometimes you meet someone and you just hate each other, and that is completely fine, because sometimes it just happens. So if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or want to chit chat with me about your pendulums, because I would love to know, have you ever had a pendulum that hated you, or that you really hated? What was your first pendulum? Kind of how has your pendulum journey progressed, if it's progressed at all? I would love to know, because I love reading and responding to comments when I can, because it is just so much fun to get to talk with everyone. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like the magical content on this channel or in this video, feel free to hit subscribe. I'm so happy because today we hit 3,000 subscribers, and it's amazing because 3 months ago I had 400, and it's just like, it's amazing. So I post new videos every Wednesday and every Saturday, so feel free to subscribe and catch me in my next video at 6 p.m. on either Wednesday or Saturday, whichever one comes first. So I will see you next time. Bye!